Terrific, and I'm live. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining me again. It's been a beautiful weekend with great weather, more or less, where I am. And I just thought I'd do a quick roundup of events as I see them kind of coming forward in the weeks to come, really. First thing I've noticed is that Mr. Gates has started doing the rounds again, and he's doing the rounds by telling everybody that there is a new variant of the bug that's coming. Maya Angelou used to say that when someone shows you their character, believe them. He has an unhappy and an uncanny knack for predicting health calamities before they unfold. And so I think we can pretty much be certain that something unpleasant is due to come up. Then, of course, there's the ongoing issues we've got with the war in Ukraine. Most people have now learned that between them, Russia and Ukraine produce something like 30-40% of the world's wheat. But what a lot of people didn't know is that Russia and Ukraine, that part of the world, also produces a good proportion of the fertilizer that farmers need to grow their crops. And because of the sanctions and so on that are going on at the moment, certainly we in the West over here are going to start struggling with fertilizer for the farmers. And what it means is that there are going to be food shortages, and food shortages always lead to price hikes. Okay. The last thing that I think is worth mentioning is that about 6-7 months ago, there was this exercise called polygon, I think, by the World Economic Forum, which talked about a massive crash of our digital systems, which would affect supply lines, supply chains, and the very intricate economies that run in the West. So, long story short, we are heading towards choppy and difficult waters. And that's the subject of this post. I'm saying that if we're forced to live a lie, meaning if we're forced not to live in our truth, what happens is we live a narrative, a false narrative that is created by somebody else. And by living that false narrative, we hand over our power. In fact, it is the shortest way of guaranteeing that we become, quote unquote, enslaved according to the agenda, wishes, and goals and directives of those who would wish to control us. Not living in your truth is the same as complying with somebody else's lie. Enough said. I don't need to paint a more graphic picture than that. But there are two examples I'm going to give about how we live a lie and how we can no longer afford to live this lie. One of them is the fact that wars are necessary. The narrative we're fed is that if we're loyal to our countries, when our countries want us to go to war, we will follow the country and go to war. But we each have the ability of discernment, and we each have the ability for critical thought. And when I look at the last 100 years, it seems to me that the First World War, which solved very little, simply protected the British Empire from encroachment by the German Empire. The Second World War, which set up the East-West divide, and between them killed over 100 million people. When I look back on it, the actual benefit to the ordinary person by the conflicts that were created this way was very, very, very little. How did Hitler come to power? Why did people watch him come to power? How did the conflict spread to Japan and other parts of the world, drawing in Britain and her colonies all over the world, so that they called it a world war? In fact, when I look at it, these wars create unbearable amounts of suffering. And it's almost as if the wars are run to feed a kind of spiritual vampirism of those who love to watch human beings suffer. And many of them are run on a tissue of lies. For example, it is known that American bankers were supporting Nazi Germany in building aircraft and tanks. How can this be so? For example, you had an American state that was fighting for world freedom running a segregated army. And as I segue onto the matter of race, let me go there further. You see, we have all been fed another narrative which perfectly suits those who would wish to control the world, in that it divides humanity, and it's the narrative of race. Now, it's been so cleverly done for so many years that anybody who has grown up in the West over the last 3, 4, maybe 500 years has to be growing up with the belief that they are somewhat better than other races who come from, other ethnicities, because there's only one race, who come from other parts of the world. Having been bribed to see themselves as superior, well, you can understand why many people, one, having bought that is actually, that lie is true, are not so keen to volubly speak out against it. And so once you've been bribed with the notion that, this isn't your battle, if the West is being racist to other parts of the world and treating them in a perfectly beastly way, and if you're white and European, that it doesn't apply to you, you will watch it happen. And instead of speaking up volubly against it, you won't be able to speak out against it, except for those people who are in the minority. And so we end up with the irony that people in countries where racist events have taken place in a systemic way, the Australians with the Aborigines, the Canadians with the Native the Native Canadians who lived there way before anybody came to that country. All of a sudden, the Canadians are being treated in the kind of ways that actually the pre-colonial, the pre-COVID colonial powers used to treat the indigenous populations of those countries. Far worse it was in Australia. Now, this isn't about scoring points. This is about establishing the principle that if something awful is happening to another party and you stay mute, a time is coming when that same evil will be visited upon you. And that is the fallacy, the foolishness of the matter of race. Now, further, we have actually been raised never to discuss race in public, which is the perfect environment for it to blossom and run silently. A bit like the programs that run silently in the background on your computer. It'll hum along perfectly happily But it requires that you and I lie to each other on a daily basis, more by acts of omission than commission, that it's not happening. Whereas you and I both know, unless we're both stark raving insane, that it's going on. There are consequences. Those in Europe are handing over their power. They are showing compliance with those who created this very narrative of race, which is based in some pseudo-science of eugenicism and so on and so forth. Then there are those in Africa who, for example, have been so brainwashed that it's not their place to speak. And this behavior has been reinforced very effectively by the fact that if they speak up about issues around race and equality and so on, people call them funny names like they're being aggressive, or they're being antisocial, or they're being disruptive. Why? For ensuring that their human dignity is respected, the most fundamental right any human, in fact, I would say any living being has. That's being disruptive? I don't think so. Rather, what it is that we are being compliant with the agenda of those who wish to ensure that a person that looks like me doesn't get on with a person that looks white and European. And in that way, when whoever that person is coming for us, he's not going to meet a single phalanx. What he's going to do is he's going to meet a broken team. Now, if things run according to order, the moment people hear the word race, they'll scurry away and run away. And I would say this, that, you know, the days when we could afford to be so pathetic and fragile and hand over our destiny into the hands of people who have signaled their intention to come for our rights, to come for our medical sovereignty, our bodily sovereignty, our liberty, our freedom of speech, and so on. The days when we could be fragile in the face of such threats are gone. I'll share something with you on my screen here. Let's have a look. This is what happened during the pandemic. While we were being asked to comply with the lockdown and everything else, this article, this came from The Guardian, and you can see it was in the first year. That was in October 7th, 2020. Billionaires' wealth rises to $10.2 trillion amid the COVID crisis. So you can see quite clearly, if I stop sharing my screen now, you can see quite clearly who that benefits. It doesn't benefit you, it doesn't benefit I. And that means that we have to continue to live in our truth. And living in our truth means telling the truth to each other about where we stand. Because if we don't, we hand over our power and comply with a completely false narrative that's been created for your disempowerment and mine. Thanks very much for watching.